First off, thank you for being here at the Pray Vote Stand Summit. Thank you for your courage, because I have seen and am convinced and have watched and testified that courage breeds courage. So thank you for your courageous stand for biblical truth. Pastor Luke, I want to start with you. You were fired from the library for refusing to use incorrect pronouns. Now, in fact, just this week, Liberty Counsel, which is representing you, sent a demand letter to, and this happens to be my hometown, so I'm a little bit involved in this and know a little bit about it. The library, they sent a demand letter that you be reinstated and that they change their DEI policies regarding gender. Talk briefly about how all this came about. I mean, you're a bivocational pastor. You were just kind of making a living for your family. And you were put into a position, you were forced to use these incorrect pronouns. You said no.
Yeah, so as a bivocational pastor, I needed to find another job that was going to support my family and hopefully have some insurance and things like that. And so I looked to the library, and I was working there for a few months. And I was in a conversation with a colleague about somebody that she was training. And in the course of that conversation, I used biologically accurate pronouns. And my coworker corrected me and said that they prefer he. And I said, I don't do that. And she said, you don't use preferred pronouns? And I said, I don't do that. And she said, that's very respectful. And I said, yes, that's very respectful. Thinking about the image of God, how the Lord has created each one of us in his image. And so to tarnish that would be to vandalize the good creation that God has made each and every one of us with the sex that he has given to us. So the next day, I was brought into the office, shown the inclusivity policy. I was given the option to change course. And I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to lie. And 2 days later, I was fired from the library.
And it sounds like Martin Luther, that you were told to recant truth, or else you were going to face the consequences.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the story from the Bible that we all grew up knowing as little kids, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were given the option. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Are you going to change course?" Basically, I'm going to give you another opportunity. And I love their response. And it says that they said, the response that they gave was that God is able to deliver us. Mm-hmm. And he will deliver us. But even if he doesn't, let it be known to you, O king. And I just imagine these Hebrew boys looking this tyrant in the eye saying, let it be known to you, O king. We're not going to worship false gods, and we're not going to bow down to the idol that you've set up.
I'm going to come back to this in a moment, because I think part of, once they realized that you were a Bible-believing Christian, you were kind of behind the veil and you saw other things going on in the library, which I think was probably a big part of this as well. And again, Baton Rouge is a fairly conservative city. After all, I live there. But the hostility within these libraries was almost universal. So I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But I want to go to Representative Laurel Libby. And I saw her, and one of the things, I'm drawn to people who have courage, that show courage. And here is a young woman who ran for the state legislature, was elected in the state of Maine, which is a beautiful state, liberal but beautiful. And all of these men would not stand up. And you have a young woman who stood up and say, we should not have boys in girls' sports. And yes, applaud. And so the Democratic-controlled state legislature, the House, censured her, telling her she could not speak on the floor of the House, and took away her ability to vote for her constituents. Did she surrender? No, she went all the way to the Supreme Court and won. Why?
You know, I have kids. I have 5 kids, not that young. And I looked at what happened, right? President Trump had issued this executive order upholding biological reality, Title IX, and in our state, a young man won the girls' pole vault state championship just after he issued that executive order. And I just looked at these young women standing in 2nd and 3rd place next to a biological male, and it struck me, you know, I have girls the same age, and it was just so incredibly unfair. And this has been going on in Maine for several years. And I just couldn't stay silent. And so I posted side-by-side photos of the young man last year in 5th place in the boys category.
Public photos.
Public photos. And then a photo of him this year standing atop the podium.
Public photos.
Public photos. Of course, they're public photos. It's a state championship. And it was for that I was censured.
And I say public because that was why they came after you, saying that you exposed this young man or woman, whatever, this person, you exposed them by showing their picture.
Yes, the Speaker of the House called me the next day and said, "You've put this young man in danger," or this person, didn't say young man, I don't think. "You've put this individual in danger. Take down your post." And I refused to do so. It went viral. And the following week, I was called into his office, told they were going to censure me. I said he would go down in history as the man who silenced a woman for speaking up for girls. And then we went into the House chamber. I tried to speak and defend myself and explain why I was standing. And the other side just objected, one after another, and they wouldn't let me speak. So they held the vote. It went down party lines, and I was censured. And in Congress, that's just like a slap on the wrist. But in Maine, that means until and if you apologize, you can't speak or vote on behalf of your constituents.
And how long did that last?
That was February 25th, and historically, folks have always apologized for the few times that they've been censured. I told them I wouldn't, and two weeks later, we filed suit against the Speaker and the clerk, and on May 20th, the Supreme Court ruled that they had to count my vote.
So what's the status now?
Well, once the Supreme Court rules, it kind of shows which way the wind is blowing. The full case was still pending in the 1st District Court. And so as that was pending, on the last day of session in June, in the last half hour of our session, suddenly there was a House resolution put forward by the Democrats to give me back full voting and speaking rights. They caved, and I'll be able to talk and vote in January.
Is such an encouraging story when it doesn't always turn out this way, and you've got to be willing to suffer the consequences, even when we pray and we see God work in such miraculous ways. Although the journey from that point where you were censured to seeing the court restore it, I mean, those were difficult times. And that really kind of sets what I want to ask you, Jason. Jason, you and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, but so Jason runs a family policy council in New York. You've heard of the name Letitia James. So she was practicing on him before she went after Donald Trump. So I want you just to share, I want you to share the story, because Jason ended up spending time in jail for a clerical error. Talk about lawfare and how they are seeking to go after conservatives in a blue state like New York. Jason is the poster child of this.
So I appreciate that, Tony. It really started in 2018. I was serving as a campaign operative, working on a campaign for a candidate who did not share our pro-life values, or opposing a candidate who did not share our pro-life values. And there was a bogus political letter that was put in, and it went nowhere because it was bogus. But that letter was what Attorney General Letitia James 3 years later used to kick open an investigation in the organizations that I direct and in my personal life. And so we went through 3.5 years of 8 different subpoenas, producing 7,000 pages of documents, looking at millions of dollars of transactions and tens of thousands of digital transactions that have gone through all of my bank records, personal and professional. At the end of that process, including subpoenaing the Christian school where I served as chairman of the board, including subpoenaing donors in my organization, they subpoenaed my mechanic for repair records in my car. At the end of that process, the only thing they found was they found 3 different missing transactions from 2 campaign finance filings, totaling $1,283.76. Not missing money, but transactions that were not properly recorded on the paperwork. That happens all the time in New York State. There were 4,000 violations in 2022, not one was prosecuted. But in my case, at the end of this process, they said, we're going to charge you with 2 misdemeanors. Now you can go ahead and go to trial, and they set it up so to have 2 trials in 2 different counties in New York State, and that will cost you about $250,000, or you can have a public defender represent you. Well, I didn't want a public defender going up against the state of New York, that much I knew. And we had already spent $100,000 in legal fees. We had lost $250,000 in revenue as they came after my donors, attendees at events. They wanted copies of my sermons. That was having a chilling effect on our donor base. And personally, we had already now gone through bankruptcy. We sold our home to be able to make some of these expenses. And so we'd been through a lot. And so we said at that point, this is a technical violation of the law. We'll accept the 2 misdemeanors, and hopefully this will all go away. That was our plan. I walked into the courtroom, and no sooner had I signed the paperwork taking the 2 misdemeanors than they hit send on a press release out of the Attorney General's office that accused me of a litany of things that simply were not true. And I believe that the Attorney General knew they could not get us in court, and so they would get us through the politics of personal destruction. I remember President Donald Trump once saying, "They're not coming after me, they're coming after you. I'm just in the way." And that became very apparent in that day, that they were coming after us and the values that I represent. As a result of that press release going out, the judge heard that, he read that. At the sentencing, he assigned me to 53 days of intermittent incarceration, weekend jail. And so July through September, every weekend, I was heading off to jail on Friday night through Monday, and I served time. For the first time, by the way, I was incarcerated. My daughter was just married 3 weeks ago. So we've lost planning time. I missed her wedding shower. I was out in time for the wedding. But there's things you'll never be able to get back. And so I just sense the fact that, you know what, God was moving in a way. Yes, he was with me in that place. But there's a cost to pay for taking the stand that we do. And I want to publicly acknowledge Tony Perkins for standing with me in an amazing way. He's been so supportive to this. And Tony, let me just publicly say thank you for your support.
Well, Jason, as you and I shared, my first assignment in law enforcement was to work in the parish prison. So I know what it's like inside of a jail. And to see what happened to you because of your stand for biblical truth is appalling and should outrage every American to see this happen. And we need to ensure that it doesn't happen, but B, when it does happen, we stand with our brothers and sisters who are going through these difficult times. Jason, I want to play just a short, there's a documentary that is coming out, and I think it's going to be a powerful documentary, just to made reference earlier to the series that Andrew Brunson has done. I think we need to learn, because this should motivate us to stand for biblical truth, to pray, to vote, and to stand, so we don't have leaders like Letitia James. We don't have those that are using government to persecute believers. But turn your attention to the screen. We've got just a short screener, a preview of a documentary that's coming out.
My name is Jason McGuire. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a Christian leader here in the state of New York. But I'm also, to the state of New York, inmate number 090198. You know, when you think about politics in our day, we tend to watch California and New York. And what happens on either of those coasts that begins to drift into other places across the country. I am the canary in the coal mine here in New York. If you gave the opportunity to leftists, to progressives anywhere around the country, this is what they would seek to accomplish. This is a wake-up call. And for the rest of my life, as a result of Letitia James' lawfare, I will always carry a number with my name, and they will know me as inmate 090198.
Jason, you alluded to this a moment ago, but it's not just about you as a target. There is a secondary goal with Letitia James and others targeting people like you. What is it?
Letitia James has targeted pro-life pregnancy centers in my state. She's gone after others. But in my particular case, again, they requested copies of my sermons. They required that through subpoena. We refused to turn them over. Not because we're afraid of what is in those sermons, but because government doesn't have the right to censor what I preach or what I say. When they requested lists of attendees at public events that I held, the donors that gave at those events, we refused to turn those things over because government does not have the right to put that chilling verdict down on free speech of those who support our organization. We refuse to turn those over. So what Letitia James' office did was instead they turned around and they got subpoenas through my bank records. And they could see every picture of every check and every transaction that went through our bank records and went after my donors through a backhanded way that we could not control. That's what the left will do when given the opportunity. So it's not just about Jason McGuire or New York Families Foundation. It's about what they want to do to every organization and to all of us who share conservative values. They seek to silence us, and we must not allow it to happen.
You're absolutely right. And that actually happened here in California when Kamala Harris was the Attorney General going after the list of donors of conservative organizations so that they could intimidate. And we're here to do what? All right, good. I'm glad that coffee kicked in after lunch. So when men and women like this are attacked for standing for the biblical truth that we pray that we'll have leaders that will stand for, and they get attacked, what are we to do? Stand with them, absolutely. Because when we stand with them, guess what? The left is going to back off because they're hoping that we will shrink back into the shadows and we'll be intimidated because they put their target on individuals like this. And so it should have the opposite effect. We should boldly stand with men and women who come under attack for their stand for truth. And Laurel, I want to ask you that. How did the Christian community respond to your situation?
You know, I still hear today, literally every day, I get messages or calls saying, I've been praying for you. And I will say, you know, that buoyed me throughout. I would walk through the State House and kind of felt like a ghost walking through the halls. I just couldn't speak, couldn't vote. But hearing from my brothers and sisters in Christ was such an encouragement. And you're right, it is an encouragement to others. After I took my stand, we saw young women around the state sharing their experience. I had no idea there was a senior in northern Maine who had been forced to change with a biological male in her locker room in 7th grade 5 years ago. But she spoke up and talked about her experience. She had been pushed aside on a podium by another young man competing in girls' sports. All of this was going on, and she felt like she could speak up about it. now, and she's made an impact. She's talked to folks in power in DC and has made a huge impact. So that encouragement, the courage does beget courage, and the folks standing with me made it possible for me to stand, to be encouraged, and then for others to stand as well.
Jason, I want to ask you about this because, I know what it's like when those metal doors clang shut and the key turns and you're locked in. Those are lonely nights where no doubt you're probably questioning, where's God? What should was there another way? How did the Christian community respond to your situation, and how did that help you through those long nights?
I have to say, a little confession, I'm claustrophobic. So when I heard I was going to be in a cell, 9x9 cell, I was not excited about that. But I was not ready for when I go into jail for the first time. I knew there'd be the strip search, I knew there'd be all those things, but I literally could take nothing in with me. Not my Bible, not paper, not a pen. They allowed my eyeglasses in. It was literally the only thing I could take in. And I'm carrying a bag that has my plastic cup and a toothbrush and a blanket for the bunk. And I go into my cell that I was assigned to set it down. And as I was setting that bag down on the bunk, I heard the door shut behind me. I did not realize I was going to be on total lockdown for those entire 4 days in that first weekend. And then the second weekend, the same thing happened. And I wasn't prepared for that. In my first lockdown, on the second day, a female guard came to the door and she said, "You're entitled to a shower. Would you like me to take you to your shower now?" Remember, a female guard. They were very professional, very respectful, but I declined a shower that day. I was not ready for that. I did not know that. And yet, through all of that, I did not experience the claustrophobia. I did not experience the fear. I remember praying, I said, "God, if there's one thing I want more than anything else, it was a copy of the scriptures." And you would think, and don't think less of me for saying this, you'd want a picture of your family or something like that. It was none of those things. I wanted God's word. I was just hungry for it. And so the female guard came back a little later after I declined the shower, and I said, "But if you could help me with a couple of things." I said, "Could you find me a Bible and maybe some paper and a pen so I could write some notes?" And with great compassion, she looked at me and she said, "I'll see what I can do." Well, she came back a little while later and she brought that Bible and she brought that paper and she brought that pen. And that was my companion during my time behind bars, was having that copy of the scriptures. The next weekend, I came back, but my Bible was gone. And I thought, oh no, here we go. And so I just asked again, "Can I get a copy of the scriptures?" And the guard was accommodating, but not as accommodating as the previous week. And so I went to bed that night. I did not have a copy of the scriptures. But in the middle of the night, I woke up. And as I woke up, I saw that someone had left a copy of a Bible folded up between the bars of my cell. And so that guard had somehow come through and delivered that for me. Or an angel, a messenger, I have no idea. But it showed up outside my cell. And I share all of that because I believe that came in response to the prayers of God's people. God's people stood with us. I have not had one believer say to me, "Man, how could you do that?" They all said, "Yeah, we know what this is. We want you to know we're with you." They would gather outside the jail every Friday at 5 o'clock before I would go in. And we'd gather in worship and song and prayer and encouragement. And they would pray with me before I went in. And very quickly, I'll just tell you this. It always struck me because at those prayer meetings, there'd be one man in particular. And he would always pray something like this. He would say, "Lord, forgive us." Because we're a part of the reason why Jason is here. Our apathy, our failure to turn out in the elections, to vote for people who are righteous, has led people who are wicked to rule and has led to where Jason is today. And to hear him own that corporately and to begin to pray that people would pray, vote, and stand, well, that just struck me, and it has hit me that he would identify with me in that way, and is waking up believers around my state, and I trust around the country, to say we've got to take a stand for the values we care about. This might be our last best stand.
That's good. Luke, as you said at the beginning, that you were just looking for a way to provide for your family as you pastor a small church, and then this happens. You had to make a choice. How has the Christian community responded to you and your situation, knowing that you had to take this stand, lost the income for your family, and sometimes it's many of us in the Christian community, we want to avoid conflict. We don't look for conflict. And one of the things I look for those I stand with, are those who are not looking for a fight, but they won't run from one. When I was a kid, I remember the first time I got in a fight, my dad wore me out. He said, "Don't you ever start a fight." Then after he whipped me, that was in the old days, but he said, "If you ever run from a fight, I'm going to whip you." So I'm trying to figure that one out. But there was a lot of truth in that. We should never start anything, but we should never run from anything when we're standing for truth. And so I want you to speak to that, Luke. Yeah, so one of the things that I got to share with you in the week after that I was fired was that, if something like this happens, you should find a band of happy warriors and go to work. And I'm so thankful that getting to meet these guys and others, that the Lord has just continued to show up and show out for me. I've seen God's love for me and surrounding me with people who love the Lord and are willing to stand with me. I've received letters from people who support the stand that I've taken. And even those letters that I've received that are hate mail. I got some counsel from an old Georgia cop. One time I was asking him about, I don't know what the Lord's will for my life is. And, he's like 6'2" or something, with like that drawl. And he was like, "Well, brother, I just wake up every morning and say, how can I make the devil mad today?" And so whenever I first started to get some text messages that were, threatening or just saying that I wasn't doing what they wanted me to do, at first it stung. But I remembered that. I remembered those words, and I smiled to myself and remembered that I was able to make the devil mad today. Another story, just really quickly, is a couple of weeks ago, after I got to preach a sermon, there was a Vietnam veteran that came to the service, and afterwards, he came up and he shook my hand. I'd never met him before. He was new to the church, just visiting. And he said, "I want to thank you for taking the stand that you did." And he said, whenever I was coming up, we had a motto that we lived by that was, "Live and let live." And we were wrong for that. And he said, "I'm proud of you." And he shook my hand. That means a lot to me. And I think that is a good sense of encouragement to acknowledge that we have been too apathetic. We have let the buck pass. We have punted on pronouns. We have punted on a bunch of different kinds of things. And what we have to remember is that if I don't fight, my kids will have to fight. Yeah. And I don't want my kid to have to fight a battle that I cowered in. Mm. That's good. Unfortunately, our time is coming to an end, but I want to do a lightning round question here as we wrap up. And it could be something else that someone else is going to face. But if we are a follower of Christ, there is going to come a point where you are confronted with making a decision to either stand for Christ or shrink back into the shadows. And I want to ask each of you to give your advice as you're at that point of decision. What would you share with those that are listening, that are here, and those watching online? And Jason, I'll start with you, and we'll come down the line.
Yeah, I would just say there are going to be people you're going to meet who have gone through greater difficulties than you have. Look to them and let them encourage you that it is worth the cost. Because I'm also looking to people who have gone through stuff harder than I, and I was encouraged that it was worth the cost. And now it's my turn to stand and say to you who may not have yet faced that, but someday will, it is worth the cost.
Tony, I think it's such an important distinction that it is a choice. Now, when I made that post, I was a little frustrated and mad, and I had no idea it would go viral and that this whole spiral of events would occur. But once it did, that's when I made my choice to stand. And I think what I've learned through this, God provides when he calls. I don't think I was prepared prior, but we have to make that choice. And particularly when it costs us, yes. I think. My daughter is 16, and I was in D.C. when Charlie Kirk was killed. And I called to tell her what had happened. And she knew I had just booked a speaking engagement coming up next month, the previous week. And she asked me, so are you going to stop speaking up? And I said no. We have to speak up when it costs, when the stakes are so high, because that's when we stand to either lose or gain the most.
Yes, that's so good.
Yeah, so one of my heroes of the faith is Corrie ten Boom. And she talked about how whenever she was a little girl, she heard about missionaries and those who died for their faith. And she was asking her dad, Daddy, I don't think that I'll be able to have that kind of courage to stand on that day. And her dad said, when we go to the train station, when do we get the ticket? Do we go a month before and get the ticket? Or do we go and we get the ticket and then get right on the train? And she said, we get the ticket right before we get on the train. And he said, that's the way that the grace of God will come to you. And you don't have to be the smartest person to be able to stand up. George Orwell said, the heresy of all heresies to the party, to the totalitarians who want to keep you quiet. The heresy of all heresies is common sense. And a lot of us have that gospel sanctified common sense. And you know what's the difference between right and wrong. Take the stand. You can do it.
Amen. By the way, I don't know if we have a link, but we are going to be delivering about 25,000 petitions on behalf of Pastor Luke to the East Baton Rouge Parish Library. I don't know if do we have a link to put up on the screen? Maybe not. But if you want to sign the petition, let us know, and we'll get your name on that petition. As we wrap up our panel here, I have something. I gave this to Lila earlier. But this is, again, it's not a challenge coin, it's a coin of appreciation. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 13, therefore take up the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you will be able to stand your ground, and having done everything, to stand. I want to thank the three of you for standing firm for biblical truth. Thank our panel.